right. Well, it's 1 o'clock, Pam. So let's
Go
get
for
ready to record. So welcome everyone to We Talk Art. This is our 5th We Talk Art of the year, and we've got a couple more scheduled. So I'm delighted at this time to be able to welcome Doug Dawson, one of the legends of Pastel. And I've been a long time fan of his work, and I'm just delighted that he agreed to talk with me today about his life journey of his art and show us some of his trade secrets, as we were talking earlier about, if he decides to share those with us. And anyway, Doug, welcome. Thanks for joining. And so I would just love to have you talk about your journey through the art world, how you got interested in art as a young child, and your journey henceforth.
Well, I knew from an early age that I had an interest in and a natural skill in the direction of art. I mean, I could draw a likeness when I was in about 3rd grade, so I knew I had good. I guess if you came right down to it, what I knew about myself was I had good eye-hand control, and I could draw things and make them look real. But I liked that. But I set art aside for quite a few years and really got involved in science. And finally, at one point, I decided that art gave me more pleasure than anything else, and I changed the direction of my life and started pursuing art. Probably when I look back on it, as far as it relates to Pastel, a couple of people had significant impact on me. One was an artist that lived near me, and his name is Ramon Kelly, and I just happened to learn that he lived nearby. And at that time, there weren't workshops. There was no way to, go out and study with somebody, go to a class, something like that. And so when I found out he lived nearby, I just called him up and asked if I could come by and watch him work. And he was most generous. He allowed me to visit his studio about 3 or 4 times. And still some of the things that I share with students to this day are a couple of things that he shared about art in general. So that, that was a big change in my life. But because I was trained as a biologist, I tend to think in terms of teaching, I tend to think in those kinds of terms, the kinds of terms where, a scientist speculates, designs an experiment to try to discover how things work, and will postulate about what's going on and design an experiment to test their speculation. And so I tend to look for the simple truth of things, which is, is sort of the assumptions scientists make that there is a truth to be known. So I start off assuming that there are things to know about color. There are things to know about design. Flower lily, I remember watching a demonstration another artist made or gave, and at one point he paused and he painted a branch on a tree, and he said, "And I like that branch." And that's all he said about it. That kind of insight is not very helpful. Because there was no explanation as to why he liked it. So my inclination is to try to understand the why of things. How do you make something look like it's receding in space and create the illusion of depth? How do you create exciting color? There's certain specific things that you can know about color. How do you establish harmony in a painting with color? There's some simple observational truths connected with that. And I tend to avoid flowery language that describes things because I don't find that there's much insight connected with it. So people that try to teach and speculate and talk about how to create wonderful atmosphere. What does that even mean? That kind of language doesn't give you even a half a hint as to how to achieve what they're talking about. They're functioning on an intuitive level, and they're trying to hand you their intuition by simply saying they're being intuitive, and it doesn't work too well. But if you can say if you can figure out why you are intuitively liking something and describe it in words, then you can hand that information on to another artist, another person who's trying to learn. You can say why the color was exciting. And if you understand why the color was exciting, you also can do a better job of picking out another situation where the color will be exciting. So understanding the why of it is, and it all goes back to the fact that I was trained in the sciences before I made a career choice and became an artist. So for example, the why of color, there's two simple truths about color. And one has to do with what creates color harmony. And so there's a simple truth connected with color harmony. It has to do with, do you have one color that has been interlaced throughout a greater part of the painting that it unifies it? And to illustrate the idea, I often talk about, I use the illustration of a weaver and somebody who sets up a loom and has maybe 30 colors of thread on their loom, but they take one color of thread horizontally and weave it into that. And that one color of thread interwoven into those 30 colors will bring them all the other colors into a state of harmony. So color harmony is greatly dependent upon that idea, but there's many ways for the artist to achieve that interwoven color. I usually achieve it by starting off with a simple palette. I usually restrict myself to no more than 4 colors with landscape and no more than 3 with figure painting. And that when you start off with a really simple palette, it more or less guarantees that one of those colors will get used enough that it creates harmony of the painting. Okay. Then the other thing to know about color is what creates exciting color. Exciting color might simply be described as the result of having a touch of color that the simplest, most broad encompassing observation is if you simply have a touch of color in a painting, a small area of color that isn't otherwise used in the painting, that creates a little exciting touch of color, and that's generally what is used to create exciting color. The fact is, in most paintings, that little touch of it needs to be a little touch of color that otherwise doesn't occur in the painting. And for the vast majority of paintings, that color is a red or an orange or a yellow. So the warm colors. That's the reason, that's one of the reasons that it's more exciting for the figurative painter to paint a woman than a man, because women use rouge, they use lipstick, they dress with more colorful clothing. All right, whereas men tend to dress more drably. Goes a long way to explain why so many landscapes, are successful that have red barns in them. It goes a long way to explain why it's easier to have success painting a fall landscape scene with yellows and oranges and stuff in it. And so there's those two basic ideas of color: the simple principle that creates exciting color, and the principle that establishes color harmony. And as I explained, before, when we were just visiting, I've got some visuals that illustrate these things. If you're interested in showing them to you.
Yes, we do want to see those. So Doug, let me ask you, you were trained as a biologist. Then did you go to art school after that, or did you do workshops? And I mean, I know you said that, when you started out, there weren't a lot of workshops, really weren't a thing at that point in time.
Basically, I took a couple, just a couple, maybe 2 or 3 classes of art while I was in college and in graduate school. So I didn't take, I took a couple of classes. It's my experience with taking classes in colleges that is, I was one of the founders of the Art Students League. And one of the motivating factors was art really wasn't being taught in colleges and universities. I mean, I hate to say this, but the general attitude when I was going to college was that if you somehow taught somebody something in art, that you were going to damage their creativity, which was such a foolish notion that it's hard to even comprehend why people would embrace it. But so there was a great tradition of what I would call absentee teaching, where the instructor would simply walk in and tell the students to do their thing, and then they'd come back and walk around and look at them. But there was very little exchange of knowledge. So I only took a couple of classes. My formal instruction, it had to do with basically one class in painting and one class in intaglio printing. That was about it when I think back on it. And like I say, so that was one of the reasons that we started the Art Students League, to give people a chance to study with artists who are actually working at their art. That was another thing about the college instruction. Most of those folks that were teaching there were not pursuing their art. Knowledge comes from, and intuition and skill comes from repeated experiences. And most of those folks were not doing pursuing their art. So the whole idea of the Art Students League was to bring people in to teach who were actively working at their art and could share their knowledge with others. We sort of thought of it as a contemporary apprenticeship kind of thing. So that was one of the major motivations when we started that school. Did I hear a voice or a question coming?
Yeah. So when was that, Doug?
I don't remember the date. That school has existed for about 30 years. It was the original Art Students League in New York City. We sought their advice, but there's no financial or physical connection with the Art Students League. But they gave us their approval. So I teach for the Art Students League of Denver, and so that's sort of the origin and the history of that school and the idea behind it, to bring people in to teach who are actually working at their art. And I lost track of the original question, so remind me what.
I think you answered it. I asked you about your art training. So when you first started pursuing art, what medium did you work in? Or did you start with pastel?
I was primarily a watercolorist. And I really enjoyed watercolor. But I decided watercolor depends to a great extent on accidental things happening. And I found that the probability of coming up with a painting that I was really pleased with, I was doing well if 1 out of 5 worked out well, because it was so dependent upon accidents, drips, other things that would happen, playing with things like that way. And so I decided I wanted to work with something besides watercolor. And I just happened to see some pastel paintings and I thought, um, it seemed like pastel was capable of the same richness of color that oil painting was. Now, I considered briefly oil painting. I considered it, but I thought, it could take a really long time and maybe not be achievable to, develop a reputation as an artist in the field of oil painting because there were so many really fine artists working in oil paint. And so there was a lot of competition, and I thought I might be further ahead if I could find something that not so many people were working with and that I could establish a reputation for. I briefly considered and played with encaustics, um, which is, if you're not familiar with the term, it's painting with hot wax. It's the oldest of the paint mediums. Besides, apart from the stuff that they painted on cave walls. So, and encaustics is capable of a lot of richness also, but I saw the work of Albert Handel, of Daniel Green, only a couple of artists that were working with pastel. And at the time, it seemed like the vast majority of artists who were working with it were sort of approaching it like uh, as a hobbyist kind of art, decorative art. And so there weren't really a lot of serious artists working with pastel. So I invited myself. I called Ramon Kelly up, who I found out lived near me, and I called him up and asked if I could just come over and watch him work. And he was kind enough to and let me come over to his studio. I think I did this all of about 4 times. Uh, Probably the things I remain or that I remembered most from my early experiences with Ramon was uh, the wisdom that he shared. One of the things he said to me was, he said, Doug, if you want to get good at this, you've got to paint about 1,000 paintings. And I did not want to hear that. I wanted it all to happen in a month. And I wanted him to have some secret knowledge he could share that would make it all work for me. But I thought, well, if that's what it takes, I guess I better get busy. Because I was I was working on my 5th painting or something, and a long ways away from 1,000. And so I became really committed to that, pursuing that, and back then the variety of materials that were available to the pastel artist were more limited. There were only a couple of companies that made pastels, and there were only a couple of sources of paper that, there was Canson paper, which was a non-textured paper, and there was a product that I forget what it was marketed under. It was a sanded surface that some pastels were using that was actually made for commercial as commercial sandpaper to be used on industrial equipment. So it was never made for art purposes. It was simply a very fine quality sandpaper that some pastelists played with and found they really liked the surface. I think pardon me?
Is that the Ersta paper?
I'm not sure, but I think it's the people that eventually developed UArt.
Mm.
Okay, so I think UArt, if you look in the back of it, you see it rated, 400 or 600. That's the way commercial sandpaper is rated, the grit of the paper. And so I think it was UArt. Then in the progression of things, a lady named Kitty Wallace came along and she developed a sanded paper that everybody was falling in love with. Frankly, I never, I played with some of these things only because so that I would understand them and I could help my students, but I use a surface now that is the same surface I used, and I use a recipe that Ramon Kelly gave me over 40 years ago, uh, where I simply mix pumice into acrylic gesso, and I paint that onto a surface, and the pumice gives it a sandy surface. And so many of my larger paintings aren't even done on paper; they're done on 1/8 inch plywood, where I'll first paint 3 layers of gesso on it to make the board white, and then I will take a gesso pumice mixture. And by the way, the simple recipe for the gesso pumice mixture is 1 part gesso, or I'm sorry, 2 parts gesso to 1 part pumice. So it's like if I took a 1/2 cup of pumice, and pumice is volcanic ash, and if I mix that in with 2 parts of gesso, and the gesso has to be cut with water. It's too thick when you buy it. You need to cut it so it has more the consistency of cream. And then I usually add some acrylic color to that. And so that is typically the surface I'll paint on to this day. And that gesso pumice mixture. And when I first started doing this, I didn't use gesso. I used a material called gel medium. Now, gel medium, if any of you have played with acrylics, acrylic gel medium is a material, it sort of looks like Vaseline when you first open the container, but it dries clear. And you can mix pumice into it so that you end up with a clear mixture that gives a paper a sandy surface. Now, nowadays, I don't know that I would mess with this if I started working with pastels nowadays, because there's so many really good surfaces to play with. So I use this surface primarily because I know what I can do with it. I've got years of experience with it, and I still like it. But nowadays, I mean, there's so many choices with papers, and I'd probably play with those to see where I could go with them. But the benefit, when I first started doing this, and one or two of you might have the book that I wrote on capturing light and color with pastel. That was published by Northlight, and I think it's long out of print, but it gives the recipe. And you can do other things with it. If you have the gel media pumice mixture, you can start off using acrylic paint on a piece of paper, like it was watercolor. So you could mix. Let's suppose you're going to do a painting, and you start off by starting the painting as an acrylic painting, but you do it with really thin mixtures of acrylic, so it's like watercolor. All right. So no heavy, thick layers, no lumps on it, just so you're going to paint a landscape, and you start off by putting you paint it as an acrylic painting. But here again, cutting it with water, so the acrylic is behaving like watercolor. Now, when it's dry, now you take the gel medium mixture that has pumice in it, and you paint that on top. And now you've got what looks like a watercolor painting that has got a sandy surface on it. Now you can go on top of what looks like a watercolor painting and paint pastel on it, and convert it to a pastel painting. And so I played with that a lot in some of my earlier pastels. Other than, the primary reason that I used acrylic rather than watercolor is if I had painted a painting like a watercolor painting and let it dry, and then tried to paint this gel media mixture on top, it would re-moisten the watercolor and smear it. So by using acrylic paint, that doesn't, so if you're thinking about playing with that idea, nowadays there's at least one company that makes that gel media kind of surface. Golden makes a pumice gel, sells a pumice gel media surface. And I think it comes in a couple of different grits. I played with it just a little bit. I think they got the recipe from me. I'm not sure. I talked to a Golden rep years ago when they started making it, but I can't complain about it because I got the recipe from Ramon Kelly, so I have no ownership of the idea. But Gel Media, the Golden Company started selling a product that that is a mixture of what looks like gel media and pumice. So if you're interested in trying that, I recommend a what's called an F4 grit of gel of pumice, which is a finer quality of pumice, and it's often difficult to find a source of the pumice. Often you can find it best at a woodworking store. They use that as in. I've never seen them use it, but my understanding is they take the pumice and you make kind of a wash of it and use it to sand layers between like lacquer or shellac. I've never seen it done, so I'm only guessing. But the kind of paper, if I'm using that, you can't just use it on top of any kind of paper. It'll cause the paper to ripple. So I paint it when I'm putting it on paper. I put it onto a intaglio paper, a paper made for printing. So intaglio papers. The one that I use is called German etching. Another one that's commonly sold is called Reeves BFK. It's those papers. If you get them wet and lay them down on your studio floor, they'll dry perfectly flat. They won't ripple. So you wouldn't want to try to do this on a watercolor paper because watercolor papers will ripple when they dry. But like I say, I've done using the same surface. I've done at least 2 paintings on a 1/8 inch plywood that are like 4 by 6 feet. Those are big pastel paintings. So for my larger paintings, I'll often go to a plywood surface. So I've talked a lot here. I don't know whether you've got some other questions.
Yeah, that's great. So Doug, somebody just asked about the mixture. So am I correct in saying it's 2 parts gesso to 1 part pumice?
Right.
And you use the F4, the fine
Right.
pumice, and then add water to get
Well, add water to the gesso before you mix it, not after the fact. So
the consistency of like a heavy cream.
yeah, so I buy a thing of gesso and then I mix water in with it and get the consistency right. Then when it comes to the mixing up a batch of this stuff, there's about 3 or 4 colors that I routinely use, and so I'll have each one of these half full of a mixture of the gel pumice mixture with a particular acrylic color in it. So there's like 2. Well, there has been like 3 colors I've used for landscape, 1 that I've used for figure painting.
What's your favorite colors for landscapes to add in?
For me, what are the colors for the landscape?
For landscapes, particularly.
Going to explain the logic behind this. Originally, I was a figure painter. Probably for the first 10 years, almost all my work was figurative art. And flesh tends to be warm in color. with few exceptions, most people, whether they have dark skin or light skin, we could say most skin colors fall into the dull warm categories, what we might gradually call browns. They're dull pinks or dull reds or dull oranges. And so my reasoning went that those warm colors look good against a cool color paper. So basically I use a gray tone for papers or surfaces that I'm going to paint a figure painting on. Now I use the same kind of reasoning when I started doing landscape. I said, okay, most landscapes are made up of blues and greens. So I'm going to play with warm colors for the landscapes. And so I use one of the containers of liquid that I use is a mixture of, or I use acrylic, it's not alizarin crimson. It's a substitute for alizarin crimson, but it's an alizarin kind of color, right? Then the other one is a it's yellow ochre basically. Yellow ochres come in a couple of different flavors, but I use a yellow ochre that is a richer color. So I have kind of a dull yellowish tone and this reddish tone that I sort of flip between for landscape. The yellow ochre one is probably the one I'm using the most nowadays, but so I just have a tube of acrylic gold ochre, or yellow ochre that I just squeeze some of that into the container. And if you decide you're going to try to do this, you want a container that you can seal the lid on it and shake all these ingredients together. It's a really messy, futile act to try to stick a spoon in it or something and stir it up. You'll get an uneven mixture. Better to put all these things together, the pumice, the gesso, the acrylic color, and like you're mixing a drink, just shake it up until it's thoroughly mixed. And so
Yeah, that's, the, both Golden and Liquitex both make a gesso that has some pumice in it.
right.
And I don't remember which one. I think it's Liquitex makes a clear gesso, but there's pumice in it. And then, or vice versa. I don't remember which, but both of them have and it's pretty liquidy. It's
Okay.
not like a paste. But I've used that and it's got good tooth for pastels.
Right.
But
Yeah, it's the Golden product. It was a Golden salesperson that I gave the original recipe to, and then about a half year later, I found they were making the product. So I figured that he'd taken the idea, and like I say, I don't object to that. I didn't own it, but I found it curious that they did take that idea and run with it.
so
Hello,
Doug,
Doug. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you hear me? This is Gerald Boyd.
yeah,
Yeah, I just wanted to greet you. I came a little late to the party. I
okay,
was trying to get an app for my computer to join the Zoom.
okay,
So I just wanted to say that we met one time. You judged the Pastel Society of the West Coast show twice, I believe. Once in 1994 and the second time in 2007.
all right,
About the time of 2007, I was on the board. So after your judging, we went and had dinner with you. And so it's been a while, but you gave me the first award as a judge. You gave me the first award I ever got in a national level show.
okay, good for
So,
you. All right.
I always appreciated that, but good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
thanks, Jerry.
Yeah.
Would you like, we've talked about we can still keep talking technique, but if you'd like, we could show you some of the art that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So some of the other things that I often get asked, I should just throw those out there a little bit in terms of landscape. So, things that I touch on when I'm teaching workshops is I touch on some design principles. I talk about, I've already suggested the limited palette for color. I talk about some of the skills that I associate with landscape, like separating space up into foreground and background. So if you're interested, if you're good with just talking this kind of stuff, I'm good with that. If you want to see some visuals, I'll show you that too.
Yeah, Doug, I really want you to share some of the visuals that you have. So I think this is a good time. But I do want to ask you one quick question. You were visiting earlier. You said that you feel like you're the second generation of the legends, if you will. And so you had mentioned some of the legends that, or the first generation of the Pastellists. So just briefly, if you'll just maybe share with us who you feel were the first generation, and then let's go into some screen share.
Okay. Yeah, it was primarily Albert Handel and Daniel Green were the artists who I saw their work in I think American Artist magazine probably. And so and actually the guy I mentioned that I went over and visited with and he helped me out, Ramon Kelly, he was one of those also that up to that point, it seemed like that the use of pastel was pretty much a hobbyist kind of thing, and nobody was taking it too seriously. But those were the people that convinced me that pastel was capable of the kind of richness that oil painting was capable of, and got me excited about it.
Good. Let's take a time now, and if you'll share some of your, I know that you've got a great video, and maybe we should start with that one because that really is.
Okay. Yeah, that one, the one I'm going to try to share, and we worked hard at trying to get this to work, but it's a 1-minute video that was made as a, what do they call it? It was originally made as an art advertisement for the Art Students League. So the idea was that it would be used as they call it I think an interstitial. So like basically TV stations that are publicly owned, the public TV, they don't take advertisement the same way others do. And so they often end up with dead airspace between shows, and they need to be able to fill that in. So I decided I would put together a 1-minute interstitial and see if I could convince them to use it as a promotion for the Art Students League. As it turns out, it was never used. But I had a lot of fun putting it together, and it sort of shows some of these skills that, and we were having trouble getting the sound to work on it. But I think we'll try it again here. Let's see.
Bonnie, can you spotlight Doug so that we can see him as the main person?
Those two were supposed to be spotlighted.
Just spotlighted.
Let's see here.
Yeah, you two are spotlighted.
Yeah, it was just one person as the spotlight would be nice, but that's okay.
You don't have the sound, but you're gonna have to. You probably have the visual, but I got to go back here. Okay, we've got that. How did we do that last time?
So we just go to screen
Screen
share.
share. I'm going here. Okay, share sound. That's it. Tell me if the sound's working. So. Is music working? Did the sound work?
That did it.
That did it? Okay.
Yeah, so let's, why don't you pull up now on your screen share some of your still images and
Okay.
talk us through those.
All right. So, but as long as we're doing this, let's see here. Let's talk about some, as long as I'm bringing some of these up, let me share some of the ideas that I briefly mentioned. Okay, so this is a painting. This is sort of where the painting is going to go. And I could run this as a video and it would run, but this is the visual that was the source of inspiration, okay? And this is the beginning of it. And it shows that as I go through here, you'll see that I'm basically restricting myself to 4 sticks of color. All right. So we get through here, we got like 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you see my cursive?
I'm just seeing your
Desktop.
laptop screen, your
Okay.
desktop screen, I should say.
Okay, so
Sometimes you have to share and unshare, reshare.
can you see my little pointer as I'm moving it around on top of this?
No.
No,
Well, okay, so
he's answering.
as we look at this, you can see at this point, I've just used about 4 sticks of color to get this blocked in. A light one, a dark one, and 2 middle value ones. And I'm also in demonstrating one of the other
I'm not
principles.
seeing anything. I'm just seeing your pictures of the slides. I'm not
Okay,
seeing the main thing.
okay, let's do this differently.
Okay.
Now are you seeing?
This is like a video that's coming up. Yep.
Okay, all right, so once
Okay.
again, sort of where the painting is gonna go. This is close to being the end product. This is the visual. Can you see that? You
Yes.
see the photos that I used as a reference? Okay, then this is the color of paper I said that one of the colors I often work on, which is a yellow ochre surface. And as I go along here, you can see at this point, I've used about 4 sticks of pastel, all right? A dark one, a light one, and 2 middle value ones. And I'm blocking it, so that illustrates, I mentioned the idea behind color harmony is starting off with a simple palette. And you can see that's going on here. and I'm blocking in biggest shapes. So one of the things that I often emphasize in landscape painting, in a landscape painting workshop, is that almost all really successful paintings fall into roughly one of three different kind of design categories. And this is one of those three. This is what I would call a painting that's made up of big shapes. It's a big shape painting, and it's we could, as it goes along here. So when I say a big shape painting, a big shape painting is one where you're more when the painting is all finished. We go all the way back to the beginning here. When it's all finished, there's often like one big shape that, so as we look at this, the distance on the across the lake here and the dark tree shapes, that all makes one like big tied together shape. So I'm not talking about all the other shapes that are going on. A big shape painting, there's often one big shape that characterizes much of what's happening in the painting. And so I've pre-decided that. And the painting, procedurally, the painting is working from large to small shapes. And so I start off with the big shapes and sort of a simple generality about what their contours are. As the painting progresses, after I get the four shapes blocked in, or the four colors blocked in, then I give myself permission to start adding other color. And I also start giving myself permission to start treating the edges. Because when you're working a painting and you're working from large to small shapes, often the big shapes that you start off with are simple generalities, simple geometric shapes. And after you get the painting started, then you start embroidering the edges of the big shapes to help suggest the texture of the objects. So, and also, as I get along here, now you can see that I'm starting to add other colors on top of this. All right. So as I go along, you can see that I'm putting other colors on top. You can see that that I'm doing what I call more embroidery work. Can you see the cursor on top of the?
Yes.
As I move it around? All right,
Yes.
so I start working with the edges. All right, so let's take a look at another one. All right, so I'm gonna I'm not sure.
That popped up there for a second of the image that you were using.
Let's see here. I'm doing something wrong here. Can you see the photograph that I'm
Yep.
using as a subject
Yep.
here?
You got
Okay.
it.
This is where the painting's going. Okay. This is the end product, more or less. Okay. This is the visual that was my source of inspiration. You can see that.
Yes.
All right. And once again, you can see I'm starting off with the big shapes, often simple geometric shapes or simplified shapes. All right. And four values, you can see, we back up here. You can see that I've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 values here. The blue one was added after the fact there. All right. So this is closer to the 4 values. So I'm working on this. I'm developing, composition is greatly dependent upon the big shapes. So notice at this point, I haven't really started to embroider the edges of that. So I'm working with the simple geometric shapes. And we're getting down closer to the place where I'm going to start playing with the edges of the shapes to suggest the texture of the trees. Okay, here there's been a jump. Now all of a sudden you see that there's edge quality that's beginning to suggest the texture of these things. All right, and I'm continuing to play with the texture. So this also gives me an opportunity to talk briefly about separating foreground and background. That there's like 5 principles that are used that artists have available to them to create the illusion of foreground and background. There are 5 observations as to what happens visually as things go back in space. Actually, there's a total of 7, but there's 5 that I emphasize when I'm teaching. And so if we look at this, we could say that area that my hand is on top of, you can clearly see it's intended to be the back, all right? And this is a background over here on the left side. And so we could say between the foreground and the background, the most powerful of the 5 principles says that contrast in value diminishes as space recedes. This usually means that your darkest dark is in the foreground. So the way I always try to visualize this is I imagine it as if there is a plate of glass, like a guillotine, that's in back of the foreground, and everything that I see through the glass is background. So this area over here on the left side is background. This area near my hand is background. All the rest of this is in front of the glass and it's foreground. All right, so between the background and the foreground, there is like 5 possible things that can be used to help the viewer create the illusion that there's depth in the painting. The most powerful one is the principle that says contrast diminishes, which generally means you have your darkest darks in the foreground. It can affect the light values, but more often than not, it's the dark. Then you have the principle that you are most likely to forget, which is the observation that detail is lost. That means that you get to see small things like ladybugs up close, and you can't see them when they're back further. So losing detail. The third one is that the edge, edges get softer. So as we look back here, we might expect that, that the edges back here between the different colors and values become soft. Then there are 2 color principles. One says, as space recedes, color gets cooler. That often means that your yellows get filtered out. So greens that are yellow-green gradually become blue-green. And if they go back far enough, they become blue as they go back in space. And there's also the principle that says, as space recedes, color becomes duller. You're more likely to experience the dulling of color if you're in an area that has heavy smog or fog. Okay, then there are 2 other principles that you don't have to include in the 5 that you just sort of automatically, those 5 are worth knowing because generally when you use them by exaggeration. So for example, the detail gets lost. Often it's the edge of shapes that is the primary thing that suggests detail. So it's this edge here that implies detail in the ground cover that's down on the lower left. It's the edge of the shape here that implies detail in the upper part of the tree. Okay, but there are 2 other principles that generally get used or can get used, but you don't even necessarily even think of them as principles. One of them is the simple principle of overlap. One thing is in front of another because it overlaps it. Another one that falls into that category is the one that is the linear perspective principle, which basically says things of equal size get smaller as they go back in space. So cattle look smaller when the herd is way off in the distance. All right, so so that's one of the things that I emphasize when I'm teaching a workshop is those 5 principles and how to use them. And now let's take a look at another one that shows some of the same things here. See if I can do this without. Just to satisfy your curiosity, let me show you how the same things are used in a figurative painting. Okay, so let's suppose, oops, let's go back to. Can everybody see the man with the beard?
No, you're just seeing desktop yet.
Okay, so you can see the guy. If I back it up, you can see the picture.
I'm
You can
seeing
see
just all the thumbnails.
Are you seeing the man now with the hat on?
No,
Nope.
Nope. Okay, let's stop this.
Are we still going? I'm sorry, my computer crashed on my end.
We're still live, Pam.
All right, it's just gonna be 2 recordings I have to splice together. Sorry about the interruption.
We've got to try to get this set up again. Let's see here.
There we go.
You can see the man now?
Well, I see you're painting.
Okay, so here's the guy that's the subject of the painting, okay? Here I'm beginning, and you're gonna see I'm gonna start him off with just 3 colors. Remember I said I use three sticks of color generally when I'm doing a figurative painting, and 4 with landscape. The reason that I allow myself more with the landscape is this allows me to have 1 color for the sky and 3 colors for everything that's happening on the ground. Okay, so here you can see I've got 1, 2, 3. If I paused it here, you can see I've got 1, 2, 3 colors. You'll notice also, I didn't talk about this, but and this goes, this is a color thing that is worth being aware of. Faces are almost always made up of dull, warm colors. To make a dull, warm color, generally speaking, I'm going to mix a cool color with a warm color. So in this particular case, I anticipate that if I painted the skin in green, then when I come back in with oranges and reds and things over the top, it will look more like flesh color, okay? I use the same kind of thinking when it comes to landscape. I know that if I were looking at a summer landscape scene with lots of bright greens, if I immediately go after the greens and paint them green, it just is too much. It will look greener if I actually get started with a warm color underneath the greens and then put the greens on top. So here we've got it started off. I've got it started off with that grouping of colors, and eventually you're going to see that I'm going to start putting colors on top here that will start changing the color of the flesh. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so you can see how I'm playing with the colors on top to make the colors look more like flesh tones. Now, if I I also I teach a landscape class and a figure class at the Art Students League. And if I've got somebody painting a figure, a person's face, and if they start off with ochres and siennas and all this kind of thing, they will create faces that look more like they're plasticky, like they're made out of plastic. They won't look fleshy. And so, you know, I encourage people generally to look at the shadows on the face and try to decide, do the shadows look like they're going towards the blues or the greens or the violets? And then based on what they decide, I'll suggest that they start off by blocking the face in with that and then put the other colors over the top. And that way you can start creating something that looks more fleshy. Let's take a look at let's take again a look at maybe a landscape again. See if I've got another one that I can illustrate that with.
So Doug, while you're looking, do you use any kind of fixative in between your layers of pastel?
No. I found that when I tried to use fixative, the color that was underneath, some of those colors tended to come forward. That often it left me in a position where I felt like I had to repaint the whole top surface of the painting because of the color change of the fixative. And so what I do is I take the painting outside and I strike it about 3 times on the back to knock anything loose that might otherwise come off of it. And then I frame it that way. Let's see here.
Oh, that was working. That was working.
Oh, it was working?
Yeah, you had that up there.
Okay. All right, let's start again. Okay, can you see the house?
Yes,
Okay, you can see me painting?
Yes.
yes.
That's where the painting is going. This is where it started. Now, often I don't start off with a drawing as I did here, but I will often begin with a drawing if I'm dealing with some architectural things. Notice that once again, I'm not starting with greens. Like the face thing, I'm not starting with the colors of the skin. Here, I'm not starting with the colors of the trees. Notice I've got 1, 2, in this case, just three colors blocked in. There's a 4th one down here below my elbow. Okay. So the trees aren't green, the sky isn't blue. Now I'm starting to bring in colors on top. I'm dealing with simple geometric shapes as I go along here. You know, there isn't that much information in the edges of the evergreen trees, but there's some. So you can see that I'm starting to develop both the outer edge of the tree, and if I back it up here where you can. So, you know, in the case of this particular tree, there's the outer edge. So I always think about using edges to suggest the texture of objects. Then there's the inner edge, the edge between the light and the shadow. Okay. So here again, you can see that I'm starting off with colors that are different. Now, you guys had some questions about color. I generally start off with the, like I say, just 4 sticks of color for a landscape, 3 with pastel or 3 with a figure. But sometimes I do the absolute opposite. And see if I can find. I don't have a visual showing this. I mean, a video that's done in steps, but I do have, what do I have here? Oh, I know.
Doug, there was kind of a second part to the gal that asked the question about this, if you spray in between your layers, and she says if
I
not,
don't.
how
I
do you?
don't. I
Yeah,
know
she
one. I only know one artist personally, named George Carlson, that does that between layers, and he does it beautifully. But I've not played with that.
there's a second part to her question. She asks, how do you avoid mixing colors, or is that part of your desired result?
Rephrase. Can you see the building here?
Yes, but
Okay.
I'm only seeing the thumbnail.
All you're seeing is the thumbnail.
Yes,
Okay. Let's.
there's the
Can-
building there.
Okay, you see the building there.
Yes.
Okay. This painting was started off in absolutely the opposite way. I had people in my class. I asked some people in my class. I took, there were like 18 people in the class, and I said, okay, I want everybody to choose a color. You're going to choose 18 colors that I'm going to get started with. And the one rule is you can't choose colors that are the colors you see in the visual. Okay. So, in this particular case, the visual was mostly just blues. So they were told you can't choose any of those colors. You have to choose things that you don't see in the visual. So the oranges and reds, none of that was in the scene. Okay. So here's the idea. It's a very simple idea, but it demonstrates how useful this concept is. That if having a common color intermixed throughout most of the painting holds it together, then you ought to be able to put the common color on top instead of underneath. So usually I start off with a simple palette, and then I add other colors on top as the painting goes. But in this particular case, I used every one of the 20 colors that they gave me. And then I proceeded to, with a simple palette, go over the top. So now and you'll see evidence of this as you look at it. You'll see the reds and the oranges and the other things, all of that happening throughout the painting. But then I'm taking one color for the color of the sky and going over that. One color for the distant mountains, one color for the side of the building. Okay. So if having a common color is the secret to color harmony, then how you create the common color, there's more than one way of doing it. So I'll show you another example is a different kind of problem, but I'll show you, see if I can find this.
So Doug, while you're looking for that image, are you teaching any? Do you have any classes scheduled, workshops scheduled that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, I have one Zoom class scheduled with North Carolina. And I'm not certain whether it may be only open to people that belong to the North Carolina Pastel Society. I have one scheduled for Texas, in the hill country of Texas, and one scheduled for Saratoga Springs in New York. That's all I've got left for this year is those. Well, I've got one, actually, I take it back. I've got one I'm going to go teach, but it's already full in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm sorry, not Albuquerque, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm going to it here the last week of August. But it's a full workshop.
Do you have some scheduled for 25?
I don't have any, I haven't been asked to do anything yet in that year.
All right, you'll be getting a call.
Good.
Do you like doing the Zoom workshops better than you do the live ones?
No. The Zoom is interesting. I like it. Frankly, I put more work in if I'm teaching a Zoom workshop, because I often go to the trouble of making a video to explain principles. And I can take as much time making a video as I might, otherwise teaching a half day or a full day of a class. So I put more time in. But what I can't, when I'm teaching an in-person class, I can walk from person to person, and I can, I'll try to explain something to a person. And if they can't, if I go back to them a second time and they haven't done that, and they haven't, I might say, well, would it be helpful? Would it be okay with you if I did some marks on your painting? So I can do that in an impersonal way, and being in person, if the person that I'm helping allows it. I always ask, is it okay with you if I do this? And it's hard to duplicate that kind of thing in a Zoom class. I can take a program that will allow me to, draw on top of somebody's image. If they, so like the class that I'm going to be teaching in North Carolina is a combination of both a Zoom workshop and a Zoom presentation. And the Zoom workshop, what I'll ask people to do is I'll ask them to take pictures of their painting in progress. And so they'll send me an image, a JPEG image, and sometimes I can take that and I can, using another program, I can draw on top of it and send it back to them to illustrate what it is I think they should do. But that's really awkward. And the tool I use to try to draw on top of their art, of course, it doesn't really change their art. It just changes the picture they sent. It has great limitations. So it's harder to share ideas. I can take advantage of the tools that are available, but it's harder to share ideas and illustrate what I mean. And I don't know whether this is going to work for you or not. Can you see the painting of the house here?
Yes.
Okay. With my cursor running around on top of it?
Yes.
Okay. This painting was done in a different way. It was when workshops used to be 5 days long, which was the standard format a number of years ago, I would usually include a day of illustrating an alternative way of painting, which is what I call puzzle painting. And puzzle painting is done by treating it like a jigsaw puzzle and putting one little shape down at a time. And so that's how this painting was done. It was one little shape at a time filled in, and next little shape. And just like solving a jigsaw puzzle, every little shape you tried to get it finished just the way it was. So when I did this, I tried to imitate what I saw accurately right here. So there was no assumption that I'm going to go back to it and work on it again. Every one of these little shapes, I just worked on it till it was done. And so that principle of mixing in a common color has to be handled differently when you solve a painting this way. Generally speaking, the easiest way to resolve it is when you add a new little piece to the painting, you try to include in it one of the colors that has already been used in the painting. And in that way, you end up creating, a common color without being conscious of it. So to illustrate the idea here, let me show you another example. If I can find this. Maybe I don't have this one included in here. Well, skip that. I don't find that included in here, but I'll show you another one that because there was some interest in night scenes, and can you see me working here?
Yes.
Okay. This painting is sort of a violation of that rule or principle of staying with just four colors. It is a night scene, and so one of the things I was thinking about is in the windows in this painting, I wanted the colors to be as intense as I could possibly make them. So I went ahead and allowed myself to use more than four colors. The four color principle basically was used all the way around the building, the distant cars, the car here, the snow. But I did allow myself a few more colors to get started with in the building. So I did that. You can see as the painting progresses, here again, because it deals with architecture, that I'm starting off with a line drawing to help me organize it. Okay, and here you can see I'm violating my own rule in that I'm going in and I'm putting in multiple colors for the colors in the windows. Then as the painting progresses, I'm sort of reverting back to that idea of having a simple palette. Notice also it's less obvious, but I'm thinking, I'm dividing this up into foreground and background, and this whole area here on the right side is background, and the building and the car and the street that the car is sitting on is foreground. And so I'm going to take advantage of that. I'm going to be thinking about not letting any colors back here be as warm as these colors, not letting any of the colors back here be you know, that one principle that says keep your darkest darks in the foreground. That I'm going to make sure that my darkest darks are happening here, that none of these darks back here look quite as dark. And so as the painting progresses, another thing that would be less obvious here is if I stop at this point, remember that one principle says that, you know, as contrast diminishes or as the space recedes, contrast diminishes, and that can affect the light values also. So most of the time, I just make sure that my darkest dark is in the foreground. In this painting, I made sure my lightest light is in the foreground. I don't let any of the lights that are happening back in here in the background lantern be as light as these lights, okay? All right, so and I'm just keeping everything here simpler. So this is where the painting finally went. You can see that and this works well in street scenes, that often the light, keeping the lightest light in the foreground helps bring it forward. So let's talk street scenes for a minute or so here. Let's go ahead, and if you guys want, we've already gone past the hour time. You want me to do this, or?
Yeah, let's hear what you have to say about that, Doug, and then we probably should wrap it up because
Okay.
of
All right.
everybody's essence of the time frame.
Okay.
This is fascinating. You know, your whole procedure is really fascinating to watch.
So do you see the store
Yep.
scene here?
Yes.
All right, so this is just a series of night scenes, okay? And you know, for the most part, you'll notice that the darkest dark is in the foreground. Lightest light happening here, no lights happening back in here. This whole area back in here is the background. Darkest dark is happening here, okay? Pretty simple, straightforward. Good, good example of a big shape painting, okay? Another night scene. How the night scenes came about for me is an interesting story worth sharing. I painted a portrait of a lady, and she was sitting next to a table lamp. It's the first time I'd ever painted a light on in the painting, and it got me really interested. The lamp in the painting, in the portrait, worked well, and so I painted some other people with holding lanterns or sitting next to lamps, and I played with that idea a little bit. And that's one of the three primary ways that creativity happens, is you do something, it works out well, so you do another one sort of like it. So there's basically three ways creativity happens, and that's one of them. That you simply do another one sort of like the last painting that you did. And so I did that with the lady sitting next to the lamp. And I painted some, but then, as often happens, when you repeat an idea, after a certain point, you get sort of bored with it. You know, you want to do something different. So I got tired of putting lamps, having people holding lamps or sitting next to lamps. So I noticed that my daughter, who was off at college, had a table set up with some toys around it, and it had a lamp on it. And that looked interesting. So I painted a scene with a lamp on, but it was a still life. So then I started painting other still lifes with lamps aglow in the middle of the still life. Then one day I was walking down or one evening I was going past an antique store, and the proprietor of the store had set out a display of basically children's or dolls, basically antique dolls. And it was nighttime, but they had this display and it had window light on. And I thought, this is great. This guy has set out a still life for me. So I went home and got a photograph, and I went back and I took a picture of his window. So now I'm going out at night looking for windows. Okay. So here's an example of that, looking for window subjects where, there's lights on. All right. Then gradually I just backed away from the storefronts and began to notice that the whole scene was interesting to me. So a woman sitting next to a table lamp led to still life with lamps on it, led to city scenes. And that this often happens with art. If you pursue an idea, just, after, you've done it a dozen times, you start wanting to play with other variations, and it just will tend to lead you places you wouldn't have guessed. So these are all, and this ends up being related to like a setting sun scene, because once again, we've got a light on in the middle of it. All right. So we've got a lights on here, city scene. Once again, I was teaching a workshop in, where was it? It was in, I don't remember whether it was in Illinois or where it was, but I was out driving around and I came across this scene, which was a setting sun scene, and I took a picture of it. Okay. Then, that leads to another one. This happens to be a scene just right across the street from my home. So you can see that. So this one was a more difficult one. We were driving back from Colorado Springs, Denver, and there, way off in the mountains, we could see there was a forest fire. So I took a picture of the forest fire from our car, which was miles and miles away from the fire. So this painting, probably the only part that really showed up in the photograph was this pattern of fire and the pattern of the cloud in the sky, the cloud of smoke in the sky. Much of the rest of this was invention. Okay. So as it often happens, when you discover something that works, you get bored with it, you try some variation on it, but you often go back and revisit it. So this was, there's an area in Denver where there's some mansions built, and this was the preliminary study for this painting. Went to London specifically to look for painting subjects. So any place where there is like a light, be it a man-made light or a source of light, I found interesting. It often led from one thing to another. This one, if you had time, I could show you the visuals, but this church does not exist. This church is a cardboard box that I made into a church, and I set it on the hedge outside our window. And this has to do with another tradition in art. You can find examples of, there was a famous shipwreck painting done in the 1800s, and it shows this triple-masted ship up against these huge mounds of ice and snow. And that they had no camera back then. There was nobody on a ship. Also, you can know that the shipwreck that happened, in this, it looks like it's in, the north, North Pole or South Pole, where the ship is just piled up on ice, you know that nobody was on board the ship and said to the captain, "Stay right there. I want to do a painting of that." I mean, the artist had to use illustration techniques to talk about these things. So
Well, Doug, that's, you've certainly given us, some great tips and wisdom. And that's really so appreciative and your time that you gave us today. I just want to thank you so much for that. And if you have any, kind of parting comments, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll be looking for when we can get you scheduled for a workshop somewhere in the
sure.
the California. Maybe you ought to come up to the Boise area and do a workshop.
Hey, I'm open to invitations, so I like doing it. Obviously, I get going here. I enjoy the sharing, and so I appreciate your inviting me to just have a visit and share ideas. So we could have gone on for a long time longer. I have a whole nother video that shows invented things that I painted.
Well, maybe we schedule a part B at some point.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Well, I appreciate you're inviting me to do this, and hope you guys feel like you got something good out of it.
I did. You've got some very interesting and good insight and all your comments that you made, I think, are worth taking to heart, and your work is remarkable, and I just want to say again, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
So thanks
right.
everybody for joining us today, and look forward to the next We Talk Art, which will be next month on the 15th of September. I'm going to be visiting with Albert Handel. So mark your calendars for that. And Doug, if you
Albert's an old buddy. Say hi to him for me.
well, if you'd like the link to be there to listen to our chat that day, I'll certainly send it to you. But anyway, guys, thanks again so much, and I hope you're enjoying the We Talk Art. I certainly am enjoying visiting with folks, and we'll look forward to a few more of these. So maybe a couple more this year, and then on to 2025.
I mean, and while you mentioned Albert, let me end with one thing that I got from Albert. I got many things from Albert, but one thing that has stayed with me the longest was that Albert shared that if you put one color on top of another and it's approximately the same value, you don't create mud. So you can experiment with layering color, and you can avoid creating mud if you stay with the same values.
And that's a great tip, because it does, and it works.
It works. I've used it many, many times. So thank you for inviting me, and I'll say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Doug.
Okay.
All right, everybody,
Yes,
thank you again for joining. Pam, thanks for keeping us all on the right note, and I hope to see you all on the 15th of September.
Sounds good. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.